Hey everybody, welcome to episode 28. Today's episode is an interview with Bryan Erck. He is a senior VFX artist at Retro Studios in Austin, Texas, and he has worked on projects like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Marvel's Adventure, Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare, and Star Wars: The Old Republic. Bryan has a rich background in special effects work at companies like LucasArts and Midway Games. I'm so excited to talk to him today, so let's dive in.
Welcome to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, the place to hear from some of the video game industry's most seasoned artists and up your game. Listen in on how you can learn and grow as a VFX artist, discover your own wizard, and network with hundreds of other talented magicians in the real-time visual effects community. Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Hey Bryan, good morning, or good afternoon. I guess it just hit 12:06 here in Texas, and you're in Austin, right? How's the weather over there, man?
Today it's pretty good. Rainy last few days. It actually snowed about a week or so ago, which was very rare, but pretty cool. But yeah,
I know. It's crazy. Do you got kids?
No kids, just me and the wife living here.
And pets?
We had a pet, Samus, but unfortunately we had to put him down a few months ago. But yeah, it's just literally just me and the wife this time.
My condolences for Samus. May she rest in peace. Yeah, it's exciting to see snow. We never get it in Texas. I'm up here in Dallas, so I'm not too far away.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So, man, I know that you've been working on all these amazing games at studios like LucasArts and Midway Games, doing stuff like Star Wars and Call of Duty, but I really want to jump into your origin story. Every hero has a beginning.
Sure.
How the hell did you get started in visual effects, Bryan?
Specifically in visual effects, and I guess later on, if you want to talk about getting into the industry, it's a little different, but visual effects specifically, I was at LucasArts as a tester. I did QA for about 2.5 years. I was teaching myself 3D modeling with Maya and/or Max at the time. I think it was Max originally. And I actually tested there to try to become a level designer. I just wanted to get into making games. And I tested a couple times to become a level designer, but they didn't offer me a position as a level designer, but they knew that I was teaching myself 3D modeling and whatnot like that. And an opportunity came up for a technical artist spot, and they tested me to become a technical artist, which at the time was, and I'll use the term technical artist loosely. I wasn't very technical back then, but at the time they literally just gave me a piece of concept art and had me model it in 3D Max and just kind of confirmed that I knew my way around a 3D application. And I got in as a technical artist that way. And doing a technical artist back then, there was a wide range of jobs, like render wrangling and palletizing images. I created icons, and I worked directly with the post-production team, the team that put together all the cinematics, the pre-rendered cinematics back then. And I did their render wrangling. I did some minor compositing. I did some minor effects work in the pre-rendered environment. Back then it was simulating in Maya, and then eventually, or Maya, Max at first, and then in Maya. So I worked kind of alongside the effects team. I just kind of started working with them. I kind of created my own real-time visual effects, and I literally created the most basic effects you could make in Maya. We're talking like back when we used to make sprites, just have a smoke column. You take a single smoke puff image and rotate them up, emit a bunch over time and randomly rotate them. I made an effect like that. I made a similar effect like that, and I faded it from gray to purple. I attached it to a cone, and I animated across the screen, say this missile trail. Very basic stuff. And through that, people were like, "We need effects artists. Is this something you want to do?" And the other team that I was already working with were all excited to train me up, so I just jumped in. My demo reel literally couldn't have any less on it. It couldn't be any more basic. But that's kind of how I got in. Now, keep in mind, this is 20 years ago. Real-time VFX artist wasn't even a job. There wasn't something you applied for. It was just something I tell people I fell into it, but it's kind of something that I wanted to do. Once I saw what the post-production team was doing and pre-rendered cutscene team was doing, it was just really cool for me to see them making, I think at the time they showed me one of the cutscenes they were working on. This was back on, say, Jedi Starfighter, where someone was just like shooting a gun. So there was a muzzle flash, and you could see this was all in After Effects. They comped in a muzzle flash and a fake light, and it was really cool. And just kind of seeing that just kind of piqued my interest. That's why I started with the real basic effects of a smoke column and a missile trail. It was almost instantly after that I was able to work on a real project. I worked on Gladius, was the first real-time effects project I worked on.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like, you came in here and you were like, man, I want to work on video games. Yeah. And you get your foot in the door with QA. And you start learning how the industry works, and you're like experimenting, and you're trying all these different areas. And you're like, maybe a level designer, maybe 3D modeling, and then out of nowhere, there's this need within the company, and they're like, visual effects is something we need help with. Can you try something? You do the work. It's not something you chose; it chose you.
Yeah, and then I also what kind of sealed the deal was, so at the time, being a technical artist there, I didn't really get to create any content that you could see in a game. There wasn't really anything. It wasn't like a model I did or a character I did where I could say, point to my parents and say, look, I did that. It was all kind of behind the scenes stuff. So with the exception of like one model. For VFX for Gladius, the first effect I made, there was like a meter that went back and forth. And if you press the button at the right time, it would, like, I think it was a green exclamation mark would appear and a shield would break. And if you press it at the wrong time, it was like a red X and a shield would break differently. And it was just so cool for me to see something in the game, not only see it in the game, but I could just literally press a button and see my effect. I guess from the debug setup we had. And it just kind of hooked me in then, because I'm finally making something in a game this is probably after 3.5, 4 years in the industry. I would say about 3 years in the industry. I'm now making something in a game and I can see it with a button press, and it just kind of lit that spark, I guess, seeing.
And it's like so different from, I guess, the traditional visual effects you see in movies and film, because you have to bake that. You put it on a render farm, and it may be hours before you can finally figure out, did it work out the way I intended?
Now, yeah, it took us. That specific one, I'm assuming I made the texture in Photoshop. Yeah, I definitely made, the original texture in Photoshop. The real-time setup back then, at least on that tool, that specific effect, I could see the effects fairly quickly. But it actually wasn't in game. It was in our effects preview tool at the time.
Okay.
Kind of like a preview. It's kind of tough to remember that far back.
Yeah. That was back in the early 2000s, right? That's what you were saying 20 years ago?
Yep. Yeah, it's been a while.
It makes me wonder when the Unreal Engine came out now, that UDK way back then.
It was around back then, but it wasn't, as popular as it is now. I remember I used UDK 3, Unreal 3 when I was at Midway, but definitely not while I was at LucasArts. And that was a good 10 years into my career, I think, when I used Unreal 3 for the first time.
So did you feel like a lot of the stuff you were doing in those early years was more on paper, or did you spend most of your time on the computer?
No, it was still on the computer with Photoshop. So you do make original textures in Photoshop, hand painted. Well, I can't, and it's crazy. I don't hand paint anything anymore now. But yeah, we had to hand paint the stuff back then. Sometimes we'd have source images, like those old discs. I want to say Action Effects or Artifacts. Honestly, I forget. But we'd have source material. LucasArts was great at having source material. They had a bunch of references that we could grab from and take them into Photoshop and modify them as we needed, or like I said, just hand paint them from scratch. A lot of times it was a little both.
I can definitely appreciate having a library of assets that you can pull and modify and iterate upon. It makes things way easier than from building an effect from scratch.
Yeah, it definitely helped. But we still had to do quite a bit from scratch. And when I say that stuff from scratch, I just mean like source images. So to make an explosion, we would still, back then it was all single images. We didn't get to like animate an explosion. We didn't have the flip books really. Because the texture memory just wasn't there. So you'd take an image of an explosion and you would, through the effects editor, duplicate a few of those and randomly rotate them and randomly move them. So they kind of looked like an explosion, but nothing really animated on its own. But yeah, LucasArts did have.
Was it still frame by frame? Did y'all do it frame by frame?
No, it would be like a single frame. So say for like an explosion, like an omnidirectional explosion, we would often take, say, literally an image, or create an image of that had the fire and smoke maybe into one good color range, and that specific image we would then import that into the effects editor, and then the effects editor we would spawn say 5 to 10 of those, give them random sizes, random rotations, random UV flips, scale them up and move them, and then together when they're all stacked on top of each other.
Oh my gosh.
If they're additive, it kind of looks like an explosion.
I almost wish you still had like a copy of one of those explosions so we could see how vastly different technology was back then and where it is today.
It was very bare bones back then. And now you just, you simulate an explosion. You take you got the flip book, you've got a whole animated sequence on one particle now. That wasn't the case back then. But also back then, we talk about this fairly often on the PS2 and GameCube. They had, the low resolutions and whatnot. You could get away with much more overdraw back then, a lot more overdraw. So we could have a lot more particles on screen at the time. So we could help kind of fill in the gaps that way.
And back then, most particles were on CPU, so there wasn't really like a GPU component.
Definitely not GPU component, yeah.
Talking about like where FX fits into the game pipeline, based off of most of your experiences, did you feel like you were involved in the creation of your effects early on in the game pipeline? Were you working with the concept artist and figuring that out? Or was it one of those things where they just kind of funneled it onto you like last minute?
It's been both. I mean, it kind of over the years, it's mostly funneled on to us later in the process. In recent years, it's been more and more priority, and studios have seen that it's important to get VFX involved earlier on. And honestly, we don't get concept art too often, at least not in the studios I've worked at in the past. But when we do, it's definitely appreciated, because a lot of times it's just kind of us coming up with the stuff, which is fun in its own right. But it is nice to have that concept art and whatnot. But yeah, to answer your question, I've experienced both. Earlier on in my career, it was coming in at the last minute. More recently, in the past 5-10 years, I've been more involved earlier on. I've been actually, when I was on Star Wars: The Old Republic, I was the only effects artist at the time. When I started there, I helped build the team and whatnot. So I had to hit the ground runner from as early as I could. They had started on the project for about a year before I came on, and then I came in and helped get things started. So it's been a little both.
That's awesome, man. And I am a big Star Wars person. I definitely want to talk to you a little bit about that. But first, I wanted to ask, as visual effects artists, we do work with so many different departments. Like that's one of the cool things about our job is we get to work with animation, we get to work with programmers, we get to work with environmental artists. Out of all of the different areas and pieces of the pie that you touch base with, who do you feel like is your biggest ally? Who do you feel like you rely on the most within a team?
Rely on? So, just kind of reiterate what you're saying. Yes, we do get to work with a lot of different departments, which that's one of the parts I love about doing what I do. Best stuff is when you can collaborate with multiple departments, and I've done that a number of times. Who we rely on most? It kind of depends on the studio and the project and the task at hand. I kind of want to say programming. The tools kind of have a lot to do with say programming and also like management away. I'm gonna go kind of like slightly different direction with this. Most of my career has been mostly proprietary engines, which often means that their tools aren't as up to date or as current as say the Unreals or Frostbite, Unity, et cetera. So you have to work with production and programming to kind of schedule their time and talents to keep things kind of moving along and improve the tech and processes there at your own studios. So in that case, you're kind of more dependent on programming time and production scheduling that to work. With that said, though, VFX, and artists in general throughout this, find a way to work with what you've got, and make cool things happen with whatever you have in front of you.
We do use a lot of hacky methods to get things done.
A lot of smoke and mirrors to make our smoke and mirrors. Yeah. So it kind of depends. I say dependent on them, but I see it as more of a collaboration. It's when we get to work with them, it's great. It's awesome. You make some really cool stuff. You also get to see and kind of experience the mindset of some of these programmers, which is, it's interesting to have the same solution in mind, but two different mindsets to get there.
And as I talk to more and more visual effects artists out in the field, I discover the mere depth and diversity that we have as a talent pool, because there are many of us who are more artistically oriented, who love the hand painted drawings and the stylized effects. Even as I'm recording this right now, Jason Keyser and Alex Redfish are live streaming on YouTube a Tradigital class. And then on the flip side, there are people who are very technically mindset. They love getting in the code with Python and building their own scripts and their own tools and helping out with the programmers. Right. Out of those two sides, which side do you feel like you fit in more?
Probably slightly art side now. It started out like you said, technical when I started, but back then technical was like a junior level technical type skill set. So right now, I'd say a little more towards the art side and trying to get more and more technical over time. But as of right now, I'd say a little more artistic. But I mean, as you know, it's kind of a balance of both to get things to work. It's one thing to create it, but you still have to get things to, at the very least, in the game facing the correct direction. And as simple as it sounds, sometimes that can be its own full-time job.
Absolutely.
I'd say I lean a little towards probably the art side right now. As games get bigger and processes change, and kind of got to probably shift more towards the technical side as things become more and more procedural and whatnot.
Talk to me about what your favorite project is or was to work on and why.
So I'm going to say my second favorite, because my first one is stuff I'm working on now, but unfortunately I can't talk about that. I thought about that. I read this on the questionnaire. I thought about it for a while. Honestly, every game I've ever worked on has kind of a special place in my heart, if you will, for various reasons. But if I had to pick one, I would say probably Star Wars: The Old Republic, just because that was the first project where I was on as an effects artist from the beginning of the effects process to the game shipping. So I was there in the early days when our effects editor didn't even work, to shipping the game. And which is slightly different from, past projects where things worked and I just came in and kind of created content and maybe managed a team, but things were already working. But the Star Wars, I was there from as early as I could have been to when the game shipped. They're all real close second places, I guess you could say, for numerous reasons.
That's awesome. I really, really love the work that y'all done on that game. And it's been through so many expansions. So I know there have been tons of effects that y'all put on there. I got to ask, of the Star Wars game, is there any one particular effect that you did that you're like, when somebody's playing the game, I did that effect?
So yes, and I'm assuming it's still in the game. And I sent you a link to, I didn't send you a link to this one, but I can if you'd like.
Sure, we'll share it in the show notes.
It's in an old demo reel, but yeah, I saw the link for it. But if you are, I think that's a smuggler class type, where you'll pull up some holographic images in front of your face, and it'll be like a screen in front of your face, and you'll see your character kind of like swiping through the images. It's like a blue and white holographic screen. But if you look at the faces that he's swiping through, it's actually the effects team, including myself. So a little Easter egg in the game there. But yeah, so you can't really, if you know to look for it, you can tell it's me. And it's the other 3 or 4 effects artists at the time. But yeah, so he'll bring it up. It's a little holographic screen. I think a drone's projecting it. And he's like, kind of like moving his hands back and forth and swiping the images from left to right.
Are each of those images cool. like a photograph that you took and you manipulate? Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, a little, and then so that's like a little Easter egg in that game. But yeah, so that one I always bring up, and people appreciate that one. Aside from that, I mean, there were I was involved. Me and the team were involved with getting the Force Lightning implemented after our great programmers that I worked with created that system. So getting the Force Lightning in that game, it's pretty cool, honestly. So getting to work with that. It's been years since I've last worked on it, so I don't know if other people have changed the stuff I've done, or if a lot of that's still in there or not. So I can't say really which Force Lightning effects are still mine and which aren't.
Sure, and we see that a lot in service games nowadays. Like League of Legends champions are getting reworked left and right, and their whole kits are just completely changing. So that is the natural order of updating games to be more current with the technology and the generations. What are some of the big trends that you're seeing out in the industry for visual effects going into 2021?
Well, a lot of trends. I mean, like the whole, procedural shift to procedural pipelines and mindsets. That's a pretty big shift, honestly. Because it's weird that I'm old enough to say this, but that's also like a generational shift, because it's gone from hand creating the stuff in Photoshop to almost mass producing this stuff. Things like Houdini and various node network graphs and things like Embergen and whatnot. But trends overall, definitely more procedural, thinking of creating quantity as well as quality, versus it's just things are just on a much larger scale in terms of quantity and quality.
What do you feel like the benefits of going procedural are, and do you think we're losing out on something that was done in the past that maybe we should hold on to?
The pros outweigh the cons, but yes, I think with every technological shift, you always lose a little something. And it goes for across the board for anything. We were joking about the other day at work because we were talking about this. And I just recently bought an iPhone 12, but I lose my headphone jack, which there's always a little stinger, right? So for the procedural stuff, so like recently I've been working in, say, Substance Designer, which is awesome because you can create a bunch of different, say, lens flares and randomize really quickly. And you can do that in like Photoshop. But in Photoshop, you can very quickly just touch something up, a specific spot on an image, which in Substance, it's not really as easy. I mean, it's quick. You can find a way to do it, but it's not the same as, taking your Wacom tablet and just, taking some brush strokes to it real quick.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. I was just reading up on some literature saying with the procedural tools, it's very mathematically inclined. So it follows very specific patterns when it's creating different shapes and textures. Yep. But to make very small iterations in very specific places, it's not good at that. And that's where like the human mind is just so superior to a computer.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of been my experience. And it's interesting, though. I think this whole mathematical approach, I hope that it spills down to like kids in high school and whatnot. Because I just remember being in high school learning math and thinking to myself, and I like math, like, when am I going to use this stuff? So now you can actually see these cool examples where you can use this stuff, as a high school kid. If high school kids can see this stuff, and then, they'll get more and more interested in it and see how they can apply mathematics to, making visual effects or video games in general.
I have definitely grown an appreciation for bell curves as far as statistics is concerned. I want to ask you about visual effects artists and what our mission in the world is. I know this is a very big question, but What is the biggest contribution that we can do for a team, for ourselves, and for a game?
Biggest contribution, I would say bringing fun and excitement to the players, to the end user. Visual effect is a great opportunity to kind of seal the deal, if you will. Like it really helps add a punch. In like Call of Duty, I'm still playing Call of Duty Warzone, and when an explosion goes off, that's visual effects. You know that it's impactful. We get to the opportunities. We get to have these impactful moments, and I think that's great overall because it's more than icing on the cake, but it's kind of like an icing on the cake. Call of Duty just isn't the same without these explosions. There's Battlefield, there's Star Wars without lightsabers.
Have you ever seen a game with just the animations? It looks very different without the visual effects.
It does. I've seen games without visual effects that are intended to not have visual effects. But yeah, it's definitely a layer of, I'm going to just say a layer of fun. Like you can, if you take, we'll say Call of Duty, for example, and turn off all the visual effects, it's not as fun, but it helps kind of add that layer. So in terms of contribution, it helps. Yeah, like I said, just kind of push things over the top to make it can help make things from good to great, I guess you could say.
For sure. So tell me then, that good to great point of view, like there are a lot of people that want to be great visual effects artists, but a lot of times they don't really know how to differentiate what a good effect is from a great one. So what's some of the advice or things that you're looking for when you look at people's effects or even your own to make them even better?
Well, I take that as kind of two ways. One, so the effect in general, if you want to critique the effect in general, you kind of want to look at the standard rules of animation and whatnot, good anticipation build up, good strong silhouette animation timing type rules, as well as if it reads well, color wise and whatnot. So I'd say for the effect itself, if you're just critiquing the effect, kind of stick to those rules of animation. But on top of that, I would say in terms of a video game, sometimes you have to kind of break those rules or change them so you can have that impactful or meaningful feedback that you need. Sometimes you need instant feedback where you don't get to follow all these rules of animation or whatnot. You need something right now, but it still needs to feel impactful and reactive to the player playing the game.
I have a question then. If you're saying that sometimes it's okay to break the rules, but you need to learn them first, can you give us an example of a time that you or somebody else has needed to break the rules to be able to achieve a very non-standard effect, a result?
A very non-standard effect.
I was trying to think of what the word is. Non-traditional.
Tough to say, non-traditional effect. So I'm trying to think of some games where I've done some stylized type stuff. Well, so back to Star Wars. And going to the Force Lightning. So you have in that game, you had your caster person casting the Force Lightning and the target who's receiving the Force Lightning, and they're receiving the damage from the lightning instantly. So the effect kind of has to go from point A to point B instantly, whereas say you'd want it to you'd want to see it traveling from point A to point B. So that type of stuff there. But that's, that kind of goes along the lines with that gameplay feedback where, you don't see the, like I said, this entire animation, it's just instantly there. So that type of stuff.
Cool, man. You've been in the industry for a good 20 years now, right, Bryan?
Yes, 2022. I celebrated my 22nd anniversary on January 4th.
Woo, woo, woo. Looking back 20 years ago, what are some things that you wish you had known when starting out in visual effects? If you could talk to your younger self and be like, do this, don't do that, what would you tell?
Here's the thing. So I thought about that question, and I want to say if I was able to tell myself the stuff I knew now, I would have been a lot more worried or whatnot. Like back then, I was young and naive and didn't know any better. I didn't know what a layoff was. So I'm not sure I would tell myself much because it would just cause me more worry and concern that I didn't have at that time. Mm-hmm. I can remember when I worked at, say, Stormfront Studios, I was only on a contract position, and I was just gotten married, and the contract was about to wrap up, and I wasn't worried at all. But now if that happened to me, I'd be extremely worried. I'd have, now I'd be more prepared. I'd have, demo reel and whatnot ahead of time. But back then I didn't even think to do that. So I guess if anything, I'd say, have a demo reel ready when the project's ramping up. But generally speaking, I kind of like going through the emotions of being young and naive, not knowing much, and then kind of learning more as I go. And now kind of looking back, it's just very different over time. But if anything, I'd say, be prepared at the end of every project, which is now it's kind of obvious, but back then to me, it definitely was not.
Yeah, it's tough because we see so much information about the do's and don'ts of just being in the workforce in general. And I know visual effects as an industry in the real-time space is pretty niche, and there's a high demand, low supply for the field.
Right.
But the bar to entry is also really high. Right. Like junior level positions don't necessarily exist in abundance. So most companies, when they're taking a chance on a new artist, they are expecting senior level quality. It's difficult for many of us. On the note of visual effects artists, is there any role models that you have, whether it's games, companies, people that have inspired you and continue to encourage you to continue doing what you do? Yeah,
it's a huge list. But generally speaking, companies wise, I always like to see what Beyond Effects, what projects they're working on. I've always been a fan of Battlefield team as well. The people I work with, I know it sounds kind of generic, but the people I work with day to day from studio to studio is always amazing. My direct team that I work with now and the programmers I'm working with now are all great, creating really cool stuff. And I love collaborating with them and creating what we're creating. Yeah, I'm part of course, the real-time effects group on Facebook and whatnot. And so there's just so much out there. I can't really single out one or whatnot, but I keep my kind of tabs on it. A lot of people doing a lot of cool stuff. So it's
Lee Armature or something. He's over at Armature Studios or something.
Yeah, I worked with him for a little bit.
Yeah, he's always telling us, we're going to get together and get beers in Austin. We got this little Facebook group, and quarantine hits, and it's just like, man, when are we going to do this, man? When are we going to do it?
Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's, as you know, it's a broad range. The people I work with from studio to studio is always impressive to me. I'm always learning stuff from the people around me, which is awesome.
That's great, man. I'm glad to hear that everybody gets along with you and you're a pretty fun-loving guy. All right. So we did talk earlier a little bit about your time on Star Wars The Old Republic, and that's how I discovered you because I am a SWTOR fan. You had mentioned that you had started the visual effects team there during your tenure at BioWare, basically from start to finish. And can you talk a little bit about how you went about organizing a team structure and building a team? And let's start with that.
Sure. So the first thing, once I had kind of ramped up on the tools, got the tools, worked with programming to get things kind of up and running. My first job was to hire, say, a number two. The advice given to me was when building your team, I think we wanted 4 or 5 at the time. And the advice I was given, there were a couple things, the key things given me. One was hire your number two, which, if I'm gone or whatnot, someone that can fill in type of a thing. Also, hire someone better than you at something, or just better than you in general. That's generally good advice. Hire people better than you, so you have things to learn from and grow yourself as well as the studio and whatnot. So that was kind of like my first task was to find that number two type person who was also better than me at various things. So that was kind of, what we did initially. And then from there, I had the budget was at the time it was you can afford 2 junior level new hires. That's what I had to work with. And for the junior levels, we didn't get to fly them on site. We had to hire them based on their demo reel and interview them over the phone, and decided to hire them there. And actually, at the time, Lee was one of those people, and another artist named Tony. But so that was our process then. And then I was also taught by my art director, which is good advice. He said, when you're a lead, just know that teams are contagious of their leads. So if you're motivated and happy and driven, your team will be motivated and driven and happy. And if you're down in the dumps and pissed off all the time, your team is going to be down in the dumps and pissed off all the time. So those key components kind of stood out to me.
Yeah,
that's kind of what we did. Yeah, and then after a year or two, we hired on some more mid-senior level artists, effects artists.
That's cool, man. I know that you did work on an MMO RPG, which did have that real-time schedule of updates. Very different from how you would expect in like one and done games. I know some games you just build it and you ship it off and you just hope for the best. What are some of those big considerations to keep in mind for multiplayer versus single player experiences in visual effects?
So visual effects and on Star Wars, by the time we had shipped, we had a good understanding of what we can pull off, on screen without going over budget and whatnot. And we were also very mindful of assets we could share. What we would do is like 1 or 2 people would work on, say, the same characters for a while. So they would more familiar with the content and the processes for that character, so they could pump out more assets than, say, somebody who's unfamiliar with that stuff. So keeping things familiar, as well as being in the mindset of what you can share and not share, and that type of stuff. And something like Star Wars, we had to pump out a lot of various effects, have to fill the gameplay void, if you will, because there isn't really a force power for it or whatnot. But just being mindful of what assets you can share and being familiar with, the tools in the system, and not scheduling things in a way that will, kind of bog you down. Kind of had that schedule sometimes.
Did you, by any chance, develop force powers while you were working there?
Did I myself?
Yes, you.
Sure.
Did you get an honorary lightsaber or anything?
I do have a lightsaber. I do have one of those lightsabers. So I left shortly after the main project ended. But yeah, I do have one of those lightsabers. If I was unpacked, it'd probably be in here and I could show it to you. But yeah, I do have one of those lightsabers, which is pretty cool.
Bryan, one of the big questions students always have is whether they should go to formal school training for visual effects in order to get a job. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your educational experience. I know you attended Austin Community College and eventually became an instructor at companies like Game Connection and Eat 3D. Can you talk to me a little bit about what the lowlights and the highlights were for being in school, and if you'd recommend it to somebody else?
Sure. So first off, I didn't go to school for video games or visual effects. The Austin Community College stuff was after I was in the industry, and that was actually more for web development. I even took some classes through Stanford. They had a program for project management. But so that stuff was all for like personal growth after I'd already been in. And on top of that, I did earlier on in my career, I did take some art classes in 3D modeling, 3D animation at the Art Institute, but that was after I was in. And those were just, a class or two here and there. I started at LucasArts when I was 19. So out of high school, I didn't do the traditional route of going to school, graduating with an art degree or computer science degree and then getting hired. There were 0 video game courses out of high school for me. And 0. With that said, I think, for younger kids, I would say definitely never stop learning. If there's multiple routes to get there, if you can go the school route, go the school route. But of course, you can also go the non-traditional route, which is, you don't have to go to school, but just be smart about it. Never stop learning. Do what you need to do to get your foot in the door. I can go into more details of kind of my story if you want.
Yeah, talk to me about that. So you got your foot in the door at LucasArts.
So I'll just kind of talk about that. It's easier for me to tell that story versus me trying to answer this question, I guess. But in a nutshell, I would say never stop learning, whether you go to school or not. I'm going to lean towards yes, but there's always alternatives, and be smart about it and be budget conscious about it as well. Because at the end of the day, it really only matters what you show on your demo reel, but you do want that classic training as well. But anyway.
Even then you mentioned that even once you were in the industry, you continued to go to school because you continued to learn, and it wasn't necessarily visual effects. You were learning web development. That's completely different from your field.
Yeah.
But you learned it because you wanted to.
Yeah, just kind of like broaden my spectrum and just kind of make myself more overall marketable, if you will. I could see that lead potential was there, and being as a lead, you're kind of managing projects. So that's kind of why I was enrolled in that Stanford curriculum. And when I say Stanford, it was their own like side business type of school that they had. It wasn't Stanford directly, but they had their own like these 6 class courses that you could take, which I was a part of. But yeah, anyway, so kind of going back to my start. So, and this is interesting because someone had just posted that DigiPen has an opening for a real-time VFX instructor. So when I was 16, 17 years old, I went into the guidance counselor's office. At the time, I wanted to create art. I had these cartoon characters that I was created, and I still do or will. I either want to do art and animation or make video games. Those things were mostly make video games. I want to make video games. And that's what I want to do as high school is wrapping up. And I go into my guidance counselor's office. Now, at the time, when I say 0 degrees for video game development or real-time VFX, I mean 0. There were 0. The closest thing there was mass media degrees you could kind of get into, which was, compositing. You can make movies. There's nothing for video games, except DigiPen had a video game, I don't want to say creation. It was basically coding for video games. And that was it. And it was programmer focused. And I remember reading their little brochure talking about, programming, what you'll be learning, how making games the Nintendo way through code and design. And you learn about algorithms and whatnot. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't even know what the word algorithm means. But anyway, it was the only thing that said video games in terms of going to school post high school. And so I took that to my guidance counselor and I handed it to him. And I said, I want to make video games for a living. And he kind of looked at it and he handed it back to me. He was holding it between his thumb and his forefinger, his index finger, like it was a wet, sweaty sock, and said, I don't know anything about video games. I'm going to let you figure this out.
Oh, God.
So from there, so I graduated high school. I was living at home with my mom. I took the next semester off. I was working at a hotel. I took a semester off because it was possible we were moving. So my plan at this point was to get my 2-year degree and then transfer to art school. For me, at high school, going to college for me was so expensive. It was just so far. My parents couldn't afford to help send me. And the idea of me applying for a loan that was $50,000 or $100,000 was just out of the question. I mean, that stuff, it might as well have been $1 million to me at the time. So like I said, my plan was to go to junior college for a couple of years and transfer to art school. And as I was, kind of doing that, the internet back then was America Online. I
remember AOL. Yeah, Instant Messenger.
I would bug anyone I could about video game development or art or video games or cartoons because I was drawing my cartoon characters. And I actually landed a phone interview with Konami. But at the same time, or very close to that time, my brother, he's 4 years older than me. We didn't really talk much growing up or whatnot. But he had actually worked at LucasArts and he let me know of a position for QA and turned in my resume for me. And at the time, there were a lot of applicants for QA back then, and there still is, but it was even crazier then. So he turned in my resume there. I had a phone interview at Konami, which I canceled in favor of the one at LucasArts. And LucasArts, they actually have a testing process now. So you come in for your first interview, I guess, which is a test, and then you have an interview. They decide if they hire you or not. So at LucasArts, it takes like 2.5 months. So I turned in my resume in September, which didn't have much on it at the time. Because I was 19, and then a month later they called me to come in and take a test, and the written test, I'll never forget it. It was a written test. It was about 5 pages, but the first question on the test was, what are your 5 favorite video games? And question 2 was, list at least 5 different game companies that you're a fan of. And the rest of the test went on to basically to see if you knew video games, and then if you knew computers. They asked if you could build your dream computer. They just kind of want to see if you. And they actually have some DOS questions in there, which I did not know the answers to, but I answered them the best I could.
Sometimes I wonder if those are trick questions, because do I list the names of the games at the company I'm applying for?
Right. Some of them are. So they had a couple Easter egg questions at the end. One was a reference to Blade Runner, which my brother gave me the answer to. But that was it. Yeah, the rest of it, it was nice to see this test all of a sudden that's asking me questions about me, which was awesome. So I had an interview, and the interview was interesting because it was me and 3 other people. One person sat way to my right at the end of the table. Another person sat kind of diagonal to my right. And the third person, if he somehow hears this, his name is John. We call him Grandpa back at LucasArts. He sat directly in front of me. stared at me and did not say a single word the entire time. Just stared at me. The other two people asked the questions. And that was my experience getting like an interview. I was 19 years old at a game company. So that was kind of weird. But honestly, the interview, it went really well. And obviously, I mean, I was given an opportunity. I remember they called me 2 days before Christmas. They actually called the day before, but I was out with my girlfriend at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I knew they'd be calling back the next day. So I just laid in bed all day next to my phone until they called. And that was 2 days before Christmas. So that was December 23rd, 1998. And I started on January 4th, 1999. So that's kind of how I got in. I basically used the internet to help out. And my brother helped me kind of get my resume turned in and kind of took it from there. That was my entry. But yeah, I didn't get to go the school route. I kind of tried, but it wasn't really an option. So in terms of going to school or whatnot, I'm definitely, I think never stop learning, especially in this business. You can't get complacent. But whether or not that's the route you take to get in, kind of up to the individual to decide, especially with the resources that are out there now. I mean, there's so much out there now. 3D was just getting started. When I was in high school, and I mean just getting started. So I didn't see it at the time. My mass media teacher saw it. Because I was drawing my little cartoon characters and stuff, and he was like, "Why don't you look at this program over here?" I think it was Lightwave. Had me fire up the computer, and I opened up the instructions. And the instructions back then aren't great. They're not like tutorials now. It's in a book. I think it had me build a cube and rotate a camera around a cube. And I just remember thinking, this is so boring. It's like, I just want to make my cartoon characters and stuff in 3D. It's like, this isn't that. And I kind of wrote it off. Once I was at LucasArts and I could actually see levels in 3D, I was just like, I have to do this. I remember getting called up to a level designer's office when I was a tester on Episode 1 Racer. They showed me in 3D Max. This is how I got on 3D Max in modeling. Yeah. They showed me a chunk of the racetrack in wireframe for the first, and that's the first time I'd seen something in wireframe in front of me in person. I'd seen it a little bit on TV, but I saw, and I just see him moving the camera around, rotating around. I was like, wow, I have to do this. How do I do this? And then I got back then a pirated program of 3D Max, which is what everyone did because it was, I think, $9,000 back then. I taught myself kind of 3D Max through help of people at work, as well as kind of doing my own tutorials. And on that note, the 3D Max, learning that LucasArts, so you could check out their instruction books for a weekend, but you had to bring it back. So I checked it on a Friday, borrowed over the weekend, and return on a Monday for 3D Max. And the book was super thick, hundreds of pages. So I checked it out on a Friday. And Saturday, I woke up early and went to Kinko's and copied every single page of that book. So I had it. I was at Kinko's for, I think, 8 or 9 hours copying that book, page by page. And that's how I started to learn 3D Max.
So a question to you on studying and learning. How do you stay motivated, especially when you feel like you're spending all your time reading and not doing?
Right. Well, I mean, and just the industry in general, you can't get complacent. And just seeing what other people are doing, what other games are doing, and also things I want to do. I mean, there's cool stuff that I still want to do that hasn't been possible yet. I still want to make an explosion on a console or PC or whatnot that's powerful enough to stay on screen for more than 2 seconds, and you can drive a car through it and have the smoke kind of whip around, or throw a smoke grenade into a room and have the laser sight from your gun actually reflect off the smoke in real time. That type of stuff. So. It's kind of the nature of it. Either you're motivated or not. And as I get older, I can see more and more people kind of get out of the industry because they're kind of getting burnt out and whatnot and done with it. But which I understand. But for me, the motivation is just kind of what I'm working on and who I'm working with. And I understand that it's a business where you can't get complacent or you can't sit still for very long.
I see a lot of older visual effects artists move into more supervisor or mentor positions to younger generations. So I believe there's still a place for everybody, but there definitely are pivots within our lives we need to adjust. And it's just, the nature of growing up.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've definitely had that feeling of burnout over the years, certain projects or whatnot. But fortunately for me, I'm at my top choice of studios and projects. So it took 20 plus years to get here, but I'm here, and it has been a surge of motivation for me as well.
Now, you don't have to tell me your age, but I do know in a little bit of soul searching that you created your own educational materials. These Unreal VFX DVDs.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was awesome. So First, I want to say, one, they're still for sale, I guess, on Amazon. I don't get any money from them anymore. I was bought out years ago, and there's more efficient ways to do them. So I'm not going to plug those. If you want to buy them for whatever reason, buy them, but don't buy them to learn. There's too out of date. But to do those, my buddy Ricky at Midway actually started Eat 3D. That transitional effect that I make in like the first DVD was an effect I had done on the game we worked on together. Was Black Site Area 51, which was a first-person shooter, it was okay back at the time, but it came out between, I think, Halo and Call of Duty or whatnot years ago, so it didn't have much of a chance, unfortunately. But so yeah, that transitional effect I made, he made his own. He was starting his own company or website back at the time, Eat 3D, and asked if I wanted to basically create a DVD with that. And I jumped on board. He said he'll pay me. I went over to his house for a weekend, and we kind of did mock-up captures, and then we did the captures for real. Took a few takes to make things kind of clean and whatnot. But yeah, we literally recorded it in his house with kind of a similar setup to this Zoom meeting now, with the camera recording us, or a mic in front of us. We didn't use a camera, just a mic, recording us in his house, in his bedroom, literally in his neighborhood is where it all started. You can even hear like a dog barking in vids if you listen for it. He did a pretty good job of muting it out, but you can still hear it.
Goodness.
But yeah, it was in his house. And then, like a year or so later, I created another one for him. But he had done a bunch on his own, and he eventually contracted out other people to do a bunch for him. E3 unfortunately isn't around anymore. He's not running it anymore. Yeah, it was kind of like Noman, if you remember, Noman, but on a smaller scale. But it was pretty cool to see him start from literally nothing. I remember him talking to me about the logo and stuff, to this full functioning website with forums and various instructors, including myself. It was definitely a good time. I like the teaching aspect of, I guess, this job and life in general. I had good teachers growing up. My parents were good teachers. My mom is a teacher, so it was. Aspect. It's something I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I definitely see like two fields of thought here. Either you become an expert in a craft and then you teach it to others, or I always think of Shannon Burke over at Riot Games. I asked her, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? Because you're such a great visual effects artist, creating these League of Legends stuff. And she's like, nah, when I get off of work, I just want to go play video games.
Right. Yeah.
But now she has a baby, so she's going to be teaching that baby instead.
Yep. Yes. I like both. I definitely like the teaching aspect of it. I also like the creating aspect of it.
So are you going to take that job at DigiPen? Is that what I heard? I'm just kidding. Maybe they take part-time professors.
Yeah. I wonder if they're still tied to Nintendo. I don't know. But yeah, back then they were tied to Nintendo. Their curriculum was sponsored by Nintendo or something along those lines.
Speaking of Nintendo, did you know there's a Pokemon game studio here in up in Washington? I didn't know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm sure they're owned by Nintendo, but it's just crazy that you can work on like Nintendo games here in the U.S., which you're doing, right?
I am.
It's NDA. I get it. I'm excited. Yeah. If I had to guess, you don't have to say anything. I'm going to go with the Metroid series, but we'll see. We shall see.
Fair enough.
Brian, are you ready to start the lightning round questions? Quick and easy, just like visual effects.
Sure. Let's do it quick and easy. I'm a little nervous. All right.
What is a perfect one-day getaway in Austin and the surrounding area?
For me right now, hopefully COVID's done and our house is finished. But I'd say, honestly, for me these days, probably like 36 holes of golf, getting a massage and hanging out with my wife. Hopefully doing all of those things with her. Yeah, as simple as that is. And at night, playing video games with my friends, which fortunately for me, I've had some of these perfect days so recently. So I can't, in the grand scheme of things, I really can't complain about too much. So,
what video game or app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
It's a project my buddy's making, which isn't out yet. I'm just testing. It's called Meow Meow. It's kind of like Kitty Canyon. If you remember that old Flash game. Other ones that people will probably recognize. I'm surprised to say this, but I'm still playing Call of Duty Warzone. And me and my friends are having a lot of fun with that.
On your phone? They have a mobile version?
Oh, no, sorry. I just thought they meant app or what, on my phone specifically. Just wanted to talk about my buddy. Other than that, I've lately been setting up our house to work with Apple HomeKit and smart locks and whatnot. So we're having fun setting up.
Sunny and that whole Internet of Things.
Yes. So we're I'm sorry I don't have like a one-off answer for you about what app I'm using, but I've been spending most of my time kind of getting that stuff set up in our house.
No, that's cool, man. We got the Google light bulbs. Mm-hmm. So, you just say, turn on the lights, turn off the lights, and it's so nice.
And so what my plan is, on that note, is I want to get a Roomba, and I want to trigger the music to play Mr. Roboto by Styx when that pops out, when it disembarks from its station and then goes around and then comes back. But see if that happens or not. That's the goal this year.
What is your favorite thing to cook or eat?
Well, my wife does most of the cooking, pretty much all the cooking, and honestly, she's awesome at it. So any of the sweets she makes me. She makes cookies. Couple months ago, she made these like brownies, and the bottom of it was a Reese's peanut butter cup. The bottom third inside was chocolate chip cookie dough, and on top was, I think, chocolate fudge, and it was incredible. So whatever she cooks up, I'm all for.
Bryan,
yeah,
keep her and never let her go.
Right.
Oh my gosh. How long y'all been married?
It will be 17 years. It will be 17 years in February. We got married on February 29th, leap year day. So we actually we got married February 29th, leap year day. So every 4 years we do like a big vacation. And unfortunately, due to COVID and us moving this past year, we weren't able to do it. So we're waiting for the all to end so we can go on that big vacation that we give up.
Yep. Us too. We were supposed to go on a Disney cruise last year, and
nice.
Guess what? COVID. Yeah. What is your favorite book or podcast you've listened to recently?
I was late to the party, but I finished the audiobook, Ready Player One, not too long ago, and I loved it. Several friends recommended it to me months ago, and I just kind of put it off, and then eventually I listened to it, and I thought it was awesome.
Did you see they came out with Ready Player 2? The book?
I did. I haven't listened to it yet.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah, but I will.
Favorite video game visual effect you're jealous of that is not your own?
I would say on this one, I had to think about this for a while, but I'm gonna go with I think the Mortal Kombat, their whole bones breaking and blood splat, like that transition where the camera kind of zooms in and shows the blood and the bones breaking for numerous reasons. One, I'm a huge fan of that transition stuff where you actually see the stuff happening. It's not just like a car and then an explosion and then the car's damaged, where you see like the stuff happening. I love that stuff. And two, I actually haven't gotten to do a ton of Liquid stuff over the years. And so seeing that and their GDC presentation on that was really cool. And also I know that whole sequence is a collaboration of a lot of different departments to get it to work. And that's kind of one of the favorite things I like to do in this industry, which I like that. And that's just a great example of that. So that whole, it's not like a specific effect, but it's that whole sequence and that whole theme, that whole setup that they have going on. I really like it. And the sounds too, can't forget audio, but that whole camera zooming in, the kind of like that X-ray type look almost, where it shows the bones breaking, I think is just really cool. Very impactful.
Best advice for a first-time visual effects artist or people looking to get into the industry?
People looking to get in, I would say take advantage of the resources that are out there. We kind of touched on this with the education stuff, but there's so many tutorials, free and or paid. Overall, just get started. I guess a little pro tip, I would say if you're watching a tutorial, I would say watch the tutorial first in its entirety, then do it. But generally speaking, just take advantage of the resources that are there. There's so much here that wasn't 20 years ago when I was getting into the industry. It's two different worlds completely. So just the resources are there. It's up to you to take advantage of it or not. Really, that's what it comes down to.
What are you most excited about for the future of visual effects?
I'm kind of most excited about things that I haven't seen yet, which on anyone's radar really, or maybe a little bit, but like augmented reality and stuff. That stuff excites me. Seeing you can't really see, but I'm on my desk right now, but being able to see look through my phone or whatnot and see an explosion, a 3D explosion happen on my desk with maybe characters that I'm running around, jumping around with would be awesome. So augmented reality is exciting for me. And kind of what I touched on earlier, I'd love to get to a point where, real-time explosions are voluminous in 3D and you can drive a car or plane through them and see the smoke dissipate away. I think things that are impactful to the untrained eye that we haven't been able to present to them yet are what is exciting for me. That type of stuff. We'll get there.
Bryan, what question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
So I wish I was asked more often to go to schools and speak on like career day and stuff. I asked to do that a couple of times years ago. It was like probably 10 years ago I was asked to do that. And I did it a couple of times with a couple of coworkers and it was awesome. The kids treat you like you're a rock star, which was really cool. They have a ton of questions. And also when I was in high school for career day, there wasn't a video game development. There was a video games presentation that you could go to, which was for like marketing and setting up kiosks and stuff. And it was pretty cool. And I was always booked and I was in there because that was the only thing towards video games. But being asked to go back to these schools, I had a lot of fun doing it. And I think the kids, and whether they're teenagers or young elementary school kids, I think there's a lot to be had there for both parties involved.
Are there any final thoughts or things you want to plug? Anybody you want to promote or pitch any projects you're working on?
So I thought about this, and I actually want to take this time to kind of give a shout out to, if I want to plug or if I want to plug anyone, that's going to be funny. I have to say, give a shout out to my wife, not plug my wife. A shout out to my wife. Right. Over the years, so I have been able to, we married 17 years, February. And so she has been able to, willing and able to follow me around every career move I've made. So I've had career opportunity after career opportunity, fortunately, or each one that has come up for me, I've taken. And so she's had to make pretty huge sacrifices to get us where we're at. And that's, we're in a nice new house now in a nice area. And as you can see, the boxes are getting settled in still, but, just give a shout out to my wife for all the sacrifices she's had to make for this to be a reality for me.
What's her name?
Her name is Lindsay.
Lindsay, we thank you so much for supporting Bryan. You are amazing, and he is so lucky to have you. All right, Bryan.
I hope I'm going to send her this link. I hope she watches this in its entirety. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Hope she does.
Hey, man, it has been awesome being able to sit down here and chat with you for the last hour. You are so amazing. And I really, really think that amazing things are going to be in store for you. And just keep us updated with what's going on in the world of the new house and everything.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with Bryan. I really enjoyed talking with him. All right, the takeaways for today's talk. Number 1, learn the standard rules for VFX before you break them. Then you can start making more impactful stuff like force lightning. Takeaway number 2, when building your team, hire your number 2, someone that's better than you at something so you can learn from them. Number 3, when you're a lead, teams are contagious of their leads. So if you're motivated and happy and driven, your team will also be motivated, driven, and happy. Guys, thanks for listening to today's episode. Until next time, rock on.